Being asked to deliver a last lecture has been one of the most humbling experiences that I've had. I was extremely honored to have been asked, and I struggled a lot with what to talk about. Vince emailed and said, talk about life lessons, and that's a pretty broad topic, and having to follow Professor Weir's last year, I was really a little concerned. So there were a lot of directions that could go. So if any of you have been in any of my classes, you will probably not be surprised that I decided to talk about these life lessons through things I've experienced through a couple of stories, which I think probably is one of the things that I'm well known for. Hopefully you can relate these to your life, and you'll find them useful in your future. I'd like to start by saying that unlike many of my colleagues who planned from very early on in life, carefully and purposely, what they wanted to do with their education and their career, my journey's been quite varied and somewhat confusing and sometimes a product of chance. So my life lessons are simple. I have 5 of them. First, own your life. Don't be a passenger. Work for what you have, work for what you want. Second, never give up. Sometimes trying is more important, especially for those around you, than actually succeeding. Third, be compassionate, always listen to others, and take time to appreciate things. Fourth, stay true to who you are. Never forget where you came from. Always be humble. Don't ever invite yourself to the head of the table. You might end up embarrassing yourself. And then lastly, appreciate what you have. Never take it for granted, and always be thankful. One compass I used was a saying my father always used to say. And he said that life is like a journey that'll take you on a lot of winding roads. And eventually you're going to come to a Y or a T in the road. He said that as long as you can return to where you came from, or at the very least, see where you came from, you made the right turn. But if you make a turn and you can't go back to your roots, you likely took a wrong turn. Remember where you came from, your roots. They're the things that made you who you are today. Whether they were good or bad, they created the person who you are now. They helped to develop your moral fiber and your work ethic, so never lose it or let it go. That idea guided me through many difficult decisions, including my choice where to ultimately pursue my PhD. I passed on admission to a very prestigious program that offered a large stipend, promised a very successful career afterwards, because during the final admissions interview with the program's director, I was asked what, if anything, I would do or what I wanted to do when I earned my PhD. My response was that I wanted to come back here and teach at Clarkson. And I was quite surprised at the director's response. He acted somewhat disappointed. And in his words, he said that with a degree from here, we expect you to go and do great things, and that a small school like that might actually be beneath you. And I thought, well, that really doesn't fit with who I am. So I recanted my father's saying. And I said that if I can't go back and teach to where I came from, then perhaps the product of that school shouldn't be here. There was a very weird, awkward silence, after which I left, and I declined the admissions offer. And now I'm very glad that I did. But I do still wonder, if I'd have gone there, would I still be the same person that I am today? Some of the great lessons that we get in life come from the most painful experiences. Sometimes they're emotionally painful, sometimes they're just tiring, sometimes they're embarrassing, and sometimes they're humbling. I learned my life lessons from a lot of influential people in my life. My parents, my priest, Father Roland Hart, Sue Wood, Dean Dale Smith's secretary, and my wife and stepkids, to mention a few. Among the first lessons I want to touch on is to own it. Be your own conductor in life. Don't be a passenger. Be responsible. Always give more than you take. There is no free lunch. Always remember that people will respect you for who you are, how you treated others, what you do, how you do it, and how you made them feel. If the measure of respect that you get from them is just simply what you have with no regard for how you got it or whether or not you worked for it, that's going to be a pretty shallow measure. Try to live your life as an example for others, and sometimes that is not easy or fun to do. Also, always remember that if something's easy to attain, everyone will have one. The really valuable things in life are hard to achieve and obtain, sometimes even painful. But that's why they're worth it, like your education here at Clarkson. Work hard for what you want, but be compassionate and pay attention to others and what they say, and never let anyone tell you that you can't do it. My dad had lung disease. As his condition worsened, my mother used to confide in me that things were not looking all that good. For a variety of reasons, I refused to listen and refused to see it. I just lived in denial for a long time. I was busy working hard for what I wanted, and in my mind, everything was going to be just fine. When the day finally came that I recognized what was going on, I decided that I really wanted to try to tackle this problem head on. I talked to his doctor, His doctor told me there was nothing that could be done. But my father placed all his confidence in me to find something, anything that might help him. So I began researching various cutting-edge treatments for his condition, and that was not an easy task without the benefit of the internet. This was pre-internet days. In any event, I found an experimental treatment that was being developed by a doctor at Harvard, so I gave him a call. I got an appointment for my father to see him. By then, it was obvious that my father didn't have long to live, nor was he in any condition to survive a major surgical procedure. And that was obvious to both him and to me. But we went anyway. The doctor talked to him about the procedure and told him to go home and build his strength, and then come back and see him in a few months and he'd be put on the list. The doctor asked me to stay around for a few minutes after my dad was taken out of the office, and he explained that he obviously was in no condition for surgery, and he likely would not get into any condition to be able to get into that condition to survive the surgery. So I thanked him very much and I headed home. The doctor said that he didn't want to take away his hope, even though he knew there was nothing that could be done. Oddly enough, we headed home not empty-handed. My dad left there with a real sense of hope, and he knew, and so did I, that the surgery thing was never going to happen, but he still left there with this really weird new sense of hope. I think it was more just about trying and not simply giving up. I learned a lot that day. I learned about compassion. I learned about hope. I learned that sometimes the things that you work for really can't be achieved. I learned that even though sometimes you can't succeed at what you think you're working for, that it's just as important to never give up the fight. I learned that sometimes it's the trying and the fight itself that is important more than the outcome. I learned that sometimes it's more about what the people around you think or feel than what you think or feel. I learned that in the end, sometimes it's hope that really matters, because hope is the very fiber of our motivation to live. That appointment was in early June, and my dad died peacefully on July 12th. In that process, I watched my mother, a very timid and weak and meek woman, summon strength and compassion that I could only hope to live up to as she comforted him in his last days and moments. After the funeral, I was bewildered, confused, angry, disappointed in myself, feeling a bit lost. I went by myself that evening to return tables and chairs we'd borrowed for the reception. And as I was unloading them, Father Hart, the priest that presided over my father's funeral, wandered by walking his dog, Rocky. We chatted a bit, and I told him I was confused. I couldn't understand why finally, when I found something that might help him, that his condition, the condition itself, would prevent him from being able to have that treatment. I thought it was pretty unfair and cruel. Oddly enough, even though it was July and a very warm night, Father Hart was wearing a small knit toque. And he took his toque off and he held and told me that sometimes life is like looking at a knit toque from underneath. So he held it up in the air and we looked underneath it. And I'll never forget what he told me. He said, "It looks like a big mess of chaotic dangling strings that make no sense, doesn't it? And you can't see any pattern from where we are." He then brought it down and we looked at the top of it, and he said, "But in the big picture from above, we can recognize beautiful and intricate patterns and designs that look like they're in proper order and like they belong there. Sometimes we don't know why we have to do the things we have to do or experience the things that we have to do, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do them and we weren't meant to be there." A month later, I returned to school to finish my bachelor's degree. I decided I'd never put things off again and would never approach anything in a half-hearted manner. Anything less than perfection was going to be failure. The lessons of perseverance that I had from watching my father struggle that day in and day out and watching my mother care for him in those last months helped me to make it into Clarkson 2 years later to work on my master's degree. When I was inquiring about coming to Clarkson for my degree, I met with the program director at that time, Dr. Fred Menz. Dr. Menz was an economist, and he was a professor here at Clarkson for a lot of years. I was told by Fred that I couldn't possibly make it through the program while maintaining my job. In fact, he kind of laughed and he scoffed a little bit and said it was impossible to do. So I left that meeting and I knew that I had to do it then. Just if nothing else, just to be able to say I did. And so I did. And I ended up getting admitted, got a great scholarship. I worked on a program for one of our educational programs while I was here, and I still maintain that job that I told Dr. Menz about in the process. The lesson I got from this, don't ever fold. Always take a setback or an obstacle as a challenge and overcome it. Or at the very least, learn from it. When you do, those are the sweetest victories. Back to Professor Menz. On graduation day, he stopped me and my family and apologized for not believing in me and congratulated me on proving him wrong. That meant a lot to me. It also made me think a lot about these Nike ads as well. I've learned countless times to be humble and live life with humility. Live life as an example for others, give them something to work towards. I've learned from my wife Amber to help others when you can, never give up on their behalf, and never place yourself at the head of the table. And while I don't advocate simply giving a hand out, I will always advocate for giving a hand up. I also learned from my wife that sometimes it's hardest to help those who've stumbled or fallen, and you should always give them a sense of dignity. Never ever exalt yourself at the expense of others. Be charitable. Feed the hungry and house the homeless. You never know who that person is or was. Just because somebody's fallen from grace doesn't make them any less of a person. They're still somebody's parent, their child, their brother, their sister, and they still matter and they still have feelings. I had a person who was a part of my life that had fallen very far. It was a family member who in fact fell so far he'd become homeless. Although he was a family member, oddly enough, I never had the opportunity to meet him before he died. And for a variety of reasons, in many ways, he nonetheless was and remains very close to my heart. Even after having fallen so far, whenever I thought about the scenario, if I was ever given the chance to meet him, in my head that conversation always started with, "I'm so honored to meet you, sir." These are the types of lessons of compassion, listening to others and missed opportunities that sometimes can be the most painful to experience, yet the most formative. Along those lines, I also learned to never let your head swell. Some years ago, I won't mention how many, when I was working towards my master's degree here at Clarkson, I had a conversation with Sue Wood about pursuing my PhD, and someday coming back to teach at Clarkson. Jokingly, I hope anyway, Sue promised me that if I ever let my head swell and I developed a certain kind of attitude after I earned my PhD, she and the other secretaries would be there waiting for me to, in her words, adjust my attitude. She still says this to me on a regular basis, and she was going to remind me where I came from. I never forgot that. Not the threat so much, well, yeah, maybe that too, but the idea of not letting, what you do or what you accomplish or where you are ever change who you really are. I had a dear friend, Robbie, who I used to snowmobile with. Rob never went to college, but rather he started a business right after we got out of high school. And he tacitly knew about business than I ever knew or learned in all of my education or schooling. When I started working on my PhD, we were going to Rob's camp back in the woods in St. Regis for the weekend. We're carrying supplies into the camp from our snowmobiles. Well, it was more beer and pizza than supplies, but. And Rob kept telling me to sit down and relax and leave the stuff out in the snowmobiles and he'd take care of them. And that was quite different than things we'd always done before. Everybody always pitched in. I finally asked him why he kept saying that. And he said, because I was working towards my PhD, that I shouldn't have to do menial things like carrying groceries. And he was very sincere and very honest. And I don't think it was intended to be hurtful or harmful or mean. He just genuinely felt that way. And I was a bit embarrassed, and I was surprised and a little bit insulted and very confused. So we talked about it, and I told him that no matter whatever anybody ever does or accomplishes, they're no different and certainly no better than anyone else, especially him. I take students to Australia, the undergrad student trip for the business school to Australia, and I've learned through my trips to Australia that to make sure you never, ever allow yourself to be exalted at the expense of someone else, and to make sure that you don't make people feel that you feel as though you're better than they are. They refer to it there as the tall poppy syndrome. It not only makes you a better human being to not be that way, but it'll also make you a better manager and a coworker. Always remember, there's something to be learned from everyone, from people of all walks of life, and nothing good can ever come from alienating people by having a swollen head. Lastly, always appreciate everything you have: your health, your education, your career, your friends and colleagues, and your family. I can honestly say that I never thought I would love my life and my career as much as I do right here and right now. I'm ever mindful that life is a very fleeting moment. Please never forget that, and be thankful for and savor every minute of every day, even the time you were in classes. I often tell my students that whether I'm a PhD, a professor, or whatever role I'm playing, I always hope to try and remain the same me, a guy from a very small town, Huvilton, and trust me, it's as small as it sounds. A guy whose parents worked very hard and never had the opportunity to have much for themselves, but gave me everything. A guy who graduated from high school in a class of under 50 people, and who still does all the stupid redneckish things that I did before I started this journey at Clarkson. Go and do great things, accomplish much, live out the values that hopefully we've taught you here at Clarkson. Defy convention. Always remember to give of yourself and serve others. Compete fiercely and be amazing, but always remain compassionate and humble. Never ever give up. Make sure you always do your best. Work hard for what you have, never expect a handout, and be sure to help others. But hold them accountable. Don't give them a handout, give them a hand up. I hope I haven't disappointed Sue. She still kind of scares me. My friend Robbie, my parents, my wife, or my family, or anyone else in how I've lived my life, please don't you. Best of luck in your future, and do send lots of money back to Clarkson once you've been here. Thank you.